Peace be with you. So we are drawing near the end of our liturgical calendar year, the end of the year for us, or the end of liturgical time. Then we continue to see, we get closer and closer in our scripture readings to looking at the end of time when Christ will come again a second time. And so you especially recognize that hopefully in the first reading from Daniel and our gospel today, in the short passage that it spoke about or had us read. It's the end of Mark chapter 13. But to get really to get a proper interpretation, we need the proper context. And so we can't just stay only with our passage today. We have to go before it and really look at all of chapter 13 to get a proper interpretation. We need this whole context. So, if you don't mind, we're just going to spend about an hour, kind of step through some things. Actually, I am going to pull out some highlights for us. But our focus is going to be on really what Jesus says, recognizing the times, or the signs of the times, or recognizing what season that we're in. He gives this metaphor to look at. He says, learn this lesson from the fig tree. So when its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. The season of summer is near. In the same way, when you recognize these things, know that he is near. So there's these seasons, you could say, with God's plan and what's happening in the world. And so he wants us to recognize what season we're in. Or we at least be able to recognize the season when he's about to come, when he's really near. So even from our passage it kind of begs us to go and look at the whole context and read more of this chapter. For example, look at some of these kind of buzzwords that tell us that. He says, okay, in the same way, when you see these things happening, then you might say, what things happening, right? If you went just back to the beginning of our passage here, when he starts talking about the sun being darkened and the moon giving its light, even before that, he says, in those days, you might say, what days? After that tribulation. What tribulation? Right? Like, these things should be sparking our brain to say, there was something before this that he's talking about that's leading up to this. And if I really want to be watchful and ready and recognize the season that we're in, I got to go before. I've got to read this whole chapter. So if we look at the whole chapter, there's also another good metaphor that Jesus gives us to help us recognize the season, the time of his coming. Now, actually, this chapter, doesn't start off talking about the second coming, which is another good reason for us to be reading the whole chapter. He actually just starts off answering a question about the destruction of the temple. So at the beginning here, basically Jesus, he is visiting Jerusalem with some of his disciples, and we see that they are in awe and marvel about all the fancy buildings and the great stones. They say, Jesus, look at these great buildings. Look at what stones they have here. The stones were huge. I mean, like 20 feet by 20 feet or something like that. They're really like building and construction and architectural marvels that we don't even understand today how they did it. That's how amazing these buildings and stones were back then. That's amazing just to think about. Even today, with all of our technology, all of our expertise, all of our so-called intellect and knowledge, and we don't even know how they did these things back then. And so it always just cracks me up when you hear people today say, "Oh, we're so much more intelligent than they were back then." Those people, really? We don't even know how they did some of their buildings, and yet we think we're more intelligent today. That's a little jab for those people who think that, In many ways, we're catching up to them still. We're catching up. So they were marveling. Jesus, teacher, look at these buildings. What stones they have here. And so Jesus, he says to them, you like these buildings? You see these great buildings? Well, there will be not one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down. So he's saying, basically, these will all be destroyed. This whole temple is going to be destroyed. We know, looking back, that happened in 70 A.D. But later, after Jesus says this, they go across a valley and they go to the Mount of Olives. And then some of the disciples run up to him and they ask him, okay, teacher, when is this going to happen? And what's the signs that it's about to happen so we can be watchful and ready and we know when this great destruction is going to occur? And then he begins to tell them signs for leading up to the destruction of the temple. And then he continues leading up to his second coming. And so that tells us all these signs that he's talking about for the destruction of the temple also apply for his second coming. But what we will see is it's not as simple as a, check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, destruction of the temple. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, second coming. It's not that straightforward. There is another beautiful metaphor he gives us inside here that helps us interpret the season. First, let's look at some of these signs. So he says, see that no one will deceive you. For many will come in my name, and they will say, I am he, and they will deceive many. So there's going to be deception. In other Gospels, it talks about not just false messiahs trying to deceive, but false prophets also trying to deceive the people, false teachings. He said, you will also hear of wars and rumors of wars, but don't be alarmed. Such things, they must happen, but it will not be the end. So notice that just all this crazy deception going around and false teaching, and then there's wars and rumors of wars, and it's so bad that people will think it's going to be the end, but Jesus says, it will not be the end, not yet. So you got to start to get that sense, because doesn't that happen so often? There's this pattern where the world will be going crazy, and sometimes it gets so crazy, somebody will say, oh my gosh, the only thing that can help us now is if Jesus comes back. He's got to be close, because look how crazy the world is, so he's got to be close, right? And then somebody will pop up and be like, he's coming back 3 months from now or next week. And then they're always wrong, right? No, they're right? We missed it? All right. Do you see the pattern, right? The world gets crazy. Somebody pops up and says, Christ is coming back again. He'll be here in 2 weeks. And then they're always wrong. That's a pattern, right? Crazy world. We think Christ is coming back. He doesn't come back. We're wrong. It's because whoever is saying that, they're misinterpreting this chapter. Watch. He continues, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there's going to be earthquakes all over the place and famines. He says, all this craziness, these are the beginning of labor pains. So ladies, we're going to need you here. Moms, you got to help us interpret this scripture here. We can't interpret the scripture correctly without moms, without the ladies teaching us about labor pains. He continues, watch out for yourselves, because he talks about persecution. Persecution coming from the Jews, persecution coming from the Romans and other governments, even division inside families, brother against brother, child will rise up against parents. All of that, all the craziness in the world around us and the craziness even within us in our own relationships, all of that is just the beginnings of labor pains. So this is where I get to go talk about something I have no experience with. Now we got to talk about labor pains. Okay, so ladies, moms, remember, we can't interpret the scriptures correctly without you. Do labor pains, when they come, they only come once, and then here comes the baby? No way, huh? Come on, moms, this is your time to shout. Make yourself be heard. No way, right? Don't you wish you got one little contraction, and then here comes the baby, right? Boy, that'd be nice, huh? Okay, so look at what Jesus is saying. He's saying, all this craziness in the world, that get so bad that people say, Christ has got to come back, or otherwise, he's the only thing that can fix this. And Jesus is saying that craziness is just a labor pain. So why on earth, when craziness happens in the world, and that's one labor pain, why would we think, here comes Christ? When we know, when ladies, you know from personal experience, you do not get one labor pain, and then here comes the baby. Right? So everyone who thinks when the world gets crazy, then that means Christ is coming, they're misinterpreting the whole chapter. They have no idea about labor pains. That means it's probably a man. It's probably a man throwing that thing out there, and he has no idea what he's talking about. Right? I don't know. I could be wrong, but when I think about it, and all the people who shout out, Christ is coming, and he's coming on this day or that day, and they're starting these little cults or whatever, I'm pretty sure they're all men, huh? I don't know if any women have actually done that. Women understand labor pains. They know you don't just get one labor pain, and then here comes the baby. We're not going to get just one craziness in the world, and here comes Christ. Come on. What happens? Labor pain, you get a contraction, and then you get a little break. And then another contraction, and then you get a break. Then another contraction, and if it's real labor pains, right, it's leading to real labor, those contractions, they're consistent, and they get shorter over time, and each time they get shorter, they get more intense, right? Right, moms? Yes. So what does that mean? I'll just continue to apply the metaphor that Jesus uses to teach this truth. When the craziness in the world happens, that's a contraction. And then there'll be a break, some quiet, and then another contraction, more craziness. And the next time, every time it happens, it's more intense, right? Just like contractions. Now, even though you can watch them get closer and closer, they never tell you exactly when the baby's coming, right? You just know it's close. Or, honey, it's time to go to the hospital, right? And that's why Jesus says, even when he's given this analogy, what he says after the fig tree analogy, he says, of that day and hour, no one knows. Even though you can measure the contractions, you can't say, on this day, here comes Jesus. But what you can say is, it's close, right? The other thing we have to remember is, contractions are just the first phase. All the contractions are first phase. They lead up to actual labor. And then when you get to labor, it's easy, huh? Oh, no, then you got to push. Now you got to push. So all this craziness in the world is just contractions leading up to labor. When we actually get to labor, that's when the church is going to have to buckle down and push. And push to be a Christian in those times. And we're pushing for Christ to come, the birth. You've got contractions leading up to labor. Labor leads to birth. You don't get a contraction and then the baby, one and done. Ladies know that. That's what Jesus is teaching us. So, next time the world's going crazy, and they say, Christ is coming, and you say, no, this is just a contraction. We're not even in labor yet, buddy. Right? And so you can relax. Yes, it's going to be stressful. Yes, there's tension. Yes, you wish Christ was coming, but you're not even in labor yet. So you can relax. He's not coming, but what he says is, he is near. Pretty good? So next time the world goes crazy, you just relax. Let him go crazy, and you get to rejoice, though, because you know that's a sign, yeah, he's nearer today than he was yesterday. You could do a little homework assignment, because you can measure contractions, right? So you can measure these contractions in the world. What are these times, these big moments when it's been crazy through the history? And you could watch and mark this moment, and then mark that moment, and mark that moment, and you can see if they're true contractions, true labor pains, they'll get shorter and shorter and more intense, right? Oh, guess what else? There's a such thing as a false labor, huh? False labor pains. You can have a contraction that's actually not leading up to labor, huh? So if we continue the metaphor, there could be false contractions in the world where craziness is happening, but actually has nothing to do with Christ coming back. It's just craziness because of demonic activity or because of fallen human nature going bonkers. Interesting, huh? And yet people want to apply it right away. Christ is coming. No, that's just a contraction. Next time somebody says that to you, just look at them and say, honey, we're not even in labor yet. Right? And they won't have any idea what you're talking about. But all the moms know. This is why we can't interpret Scripture correctly without ladies. Men will get it wrong on our own. Probably in that time, in those contractions, when we actually get to actual labor, in those seasons, the church is going to need women more than ever because they have experience of this. And they can tell us men to buckle down and push, right? So we need you, ladies. All right, let's stand and renew our faith with the creed. I believe